Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Welcome to Reporter Direct. My name is Simrin Sirur. I'm a senior correspondent with ThePrint. I want to first start by thanking everybody who's participating in this, all of our subscribers. Thank you so much for your support, for coming here, for listening to us, for showing us that the stories that we do matter, for telling us that the stories that we report are being read and being heard and being watched. So thank you so much for being here. A little bit about Reporters Direct. It's an opportunity for us and for you to sort of learn a little bit more about how we put ground reports together. And we're here to answer any questions that you may have about how we make that possible and how we're able to string various narratives together to create a product that can then be read, watched, heard by viewers from around the world. So please continue. I mean, we have a few questions, but please send more as and when you would like. About me, I have over the last year been covering COVID for ThePrint. I have also done a few non-COVID stories. Right now, I'm in Imphal in Manipur to cover a few stories. At the beginning of the year, I was in Jharkhand to cover mica mining. I then went to Gujarat to cover a few stories. One about forestry, the regeneration of a forest in Girnar, as well as sort of doing a story on these Muslim men who were acquitted 20 years after they were accused of being semi-terrorists. I also covered the Kumbh Mela in April, and now I'm here in Manipur and Imphal. So I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. Please send them in. I am going to start with a few that we've already received. So Sahil wants to know, how do reporters approach a particular story and get it to readers? Most of the times the core message is diverted. How are you able to, tell a story without that happening? So every story has a set of ingredients and a set of stakeholders. The most important thing is giving every stakeholder an opportunity, every stakeholder who's involved in the situation and in the story that you're covering, giving them an opportunity to air their views, also holding them to account, also doing your own due diligence to make sure that you've given everybody an opportunity to have their say, because that's an important part of corroborating as well. So that's essentially the basic sort of ingredient. It's the basic framework sort of what you would follow when you're reporting a story. You have to make sure that you've got this, you've got that, you've got this, and you've got that. So essentially, very roughly put, that's how it is. We've also got a question from Venki. So Venki says, I aspire to be a good journalist someday and studied a part-time master's degree in journalism. I can narrate well in writing, but I'm people shy and don't pick up proactive conversations with strangers. What tips can you share to overcome this? So this is one of my favorite questions, and thank you so much, Venki, for asking this, because I was also I think getting into journalism has been one of the most, it's really pushed my boundaries and it's really forced me to step out of my comfort zone. I was also very people shy. In fact, picking up the phone to make a phone call was something I had to prep for. I was the kind of person in college who would get like sweats if I had to say something in front of people in class. Um, so it was never easy for me. I always was worried about, making a call, talking to people, putting myself out there. Um, but the thing with journalism, and the great thing about journalism is that it's something that everybody can do, including people like you and me, um, who don't consider ourselves extroverts. So um, the way to overcome this is to sort of not picture the people that you're speaking to as being much bigger than you, and also to remember that you're doing your job. You're not troubling them. You're not out of line by calling somebody um, to seek their response about something. So I think those two things, but also just the practice of it, the fact that you do it more often, it becomes less and less and less scary and less nerve-wracking for those of us who do feel nervous about it. So I think it's a combination of these three things which really helped me, and it served me well when I was starting out. Please continue to send in your questions. I am going to take a few more from the pool that we have. Um, so SP Singh asks, how do you identify a topic of investigation? Is it done by you or the organization, or does the organization assign a topic to you? So it's a mix of both. Um, Editors will often tell you stories to pursue. Other times you're always expected to sort of have ideas. You're expected to be talking to people so that you have so that you're on top of your topic and what you're supposed to be doing. um, so it's a mix of the two. The way that you can sort of a great source of stories is reading a lot, read widely, read all sorts of publications. Also, obviously, talking to people, staying in touch with sources and people you have spoken to in the past for certain stories, people who helped you in the past. It's really important to stay in touch with them, ask them how they're doing once in a while, send them a message, make sure that they know that you remember them. Um, those are the kinds of things. So once you establish that kind of rapport with people, the conversation gets flowing, and you often land up with something or the other when you speak to a wide variety of people. So that's one way of choosing your topic of investigation. Of course, there are other methods. Filing RTIs about particular caveats or loopholes, things that you can see are clearly missing um, in say the government's narrative about certain things. That's another third way. So I would say it's a mix of all of these things. Um, I'm just going to find a few more questions. So Aditya says, "Hi, I'm more interested in concepts and methods journalists apply to any story which they are doing to filter out the relevant information from a bunch of irrelevant information. Also, throw some light on the writing of a story to make it more compelling to readers." So, um, filtering out relevant information from irrelevant information is often quite intuitive. There's no formula. It's when you choose to pursue a story, you obviously have reason to, and when you're a journalist, you're expected to be up to date with everything, including the story that you're pursuing. So when there is a new development, you're able to easily identify that, and that would obviously become sort of the most relevant aspect of what you're working on. Um, Other times, I mean, it is very intuitive, but for example, when you receive a lot of documentation, it's really important to go through that with a fine tooth comb. Sometimes, especially with government documents, it's not always written in the easiest language. Sometimes the language is kind of obfuscating the message. So it's important to go through it in detail, try to break down what's happening so that you are able to first understand what is going on before you um, express or write it for an audience. Um, that is, I would say, how you filter out relevant and irrelevant information. Sunil is asking, I want to know more about your first-hand experience with the Kumbh Mela. As a doctor and scientist, I think these large gatherings uh, were much more responsible for the devastating second wave. The just I'll just repeat the question. Sunil wants to know more about my first-hand experience at the Kumbh Mela, and what my take on this large gathering was. So I'm going to sort of refrain from expressing my personal views, but my first-hand experience was that it was quite incredible, and it felt unbelievable to see such large crowds, just as cases were picking up, and just as variants were also being discovered around that time. It was a very scary experience. It was um, there were absolutely no precautions being taken as far as I could see, especially during the Ganga Aarti at night, in the evenings. In the daytime, the Mela officials were saying things like, we can't really enforce social distancing or mask wearing because things may turn violent, the sadhus may turn violent. The akharas were very aggressive, not willing to test. Testing booths not were lying empty a lot of the time. And one surprising experience that I had, and now with the Kumbh Mela, the latest news is that over a lakh uh, tests were found to be are under investigation for possibly being fake. One of my experiences was that I got a text message saying that my sample had been collected and it was an RAT test and it was negative, but I had never given a sample. And in fact, as I got that message, I was sitting in my hotel room typing out a story. So there was no way that they could have got my sample. The only way that this could have happened is when at the border I was presenting my negative RT-PCR. One of the rules at the time was that everybody entering the Kumbh Mela has to have a negative RT-PCR report, which I did have. They noted down my name and number and let me go. But then I got this message 2 days later saying that an RAT had been done in my name, whereas I had never given that sample. So I happened to have taken the number of the person who had written my name and number down at the border, and I spoke to him, and he said, "It's not just you. We're doing this with everybody who passes through." So that was also a really scary experience, especially when you're thinking about what that means for the state's positivity, what it means for the true number of COVID positives in the state at the time. So that's a little bit about my first-hand experience. Um, Ashok wants to know, how do you check the veracity and credibility of a news source? So this is a good question. It depends on the kind of story you're doing. But a lot of the best way to sort of check the veracity or credibility is to just try to corroborate what somebody is saying. Try to find somebody else who's saying the same thing, who isn't maybe directly linked to the first person you spoke to. Try to find documentation to support somebody's claims. Those are two ways in which you can sort of gauge the credibility of or the veracity of what somebody is saying. Uh, yeah. Give me Uh, so okay, so SP wants to know, I would like to ask the speaker, how do they get unwilling persons to respond? There are times when people are too busy with their daily routines. How do you get somebody to talk to you? I think that is a good question. One of the things that I was really worried about when I got into journalism was this, like, how do you get people to talk to you? The surprising thing is that people who aren't necessarily in office or in or bureaucrats, people who aren't in high positions of power, are more often than not likely and willing to speak to journalists in my experience, unless of course it's dealing with something very personal, very uh, tragic, or people don't trust the media for various reasons. So the way to get somebody to talk to you is to first of all be really polite, try to understand why they don't want to talk to you, try to empathize with that a little bit, and from there try to persuade the person by assuring them that you're not going to misquote them, that you're not going to misrepresent what they want to say, and also that try to make them understand the reason for your reaching out to them. Obviously there is a basis for, when you seek comment from somebody, explaining that to people can sometimes change their mind. These are ways, but beyond a point, like I said, being polite, being persistent, uh, always, I mean, when somebody says no, follow up and say, like, I'm sorry, but this is why I'm reaching out to you again. Often people can be really rude, they can be really dismissive. Part of the job is sort of gritting your teeth through that and hoping they'll change their mind. Um, so other times, if somebody gives you a hard no and you've tried everything you can, then there's nothing you can do. Another way is to also reach out to people more than you can reach out to them via phone, you can reach out to them via text message, via email. It's often best to cover all your bases so that you've made sure that you're able to reach out to that person in all ways possible. um, so that is how. Keyur wants to know, how do you balance the objectivity of reporting with the empathy you feel when you see people suffering? So this is another really good question. I actually feel like empathy is a really important component to reporting. I think it's a really it's central to the way we communicate and tell a story. So I don't necessarily see that having to be cancelled out or balanced per se by anything. Like I said at the beginning of this, a really important, all stories are like, you have to have a checklist of ingredients, which means that you reach out to X, Y, and Z people so that your story um, has those perspectives. So um, when you're reporting on something tragic or something really heart wrenching, I don't think it's doing anybody favors when you're playing that down or diminishing that. Um, the way to sort of, it's important to acknowledge that and of course report about it, but also give other people who are involved in that situation, in either creating that situation or are involved in mitigating that situation, to have to accommodate that point of view. And so when you do that, I see it more as holding people to account. I also see it as due diligence, um, and giving people who are involved a say in the matter, because uh, it's important that the story mentions that you've reached out to people for comment on a particular situation. So I think empathy is a really important part of reporting. I think um, I don't think that it has to necessarily be diminished uh, or uh, or or dismissed. Um, that is my view, and also what kind of guides my reporting and writing. Obviously, you have to do diligence at every level. So even when you are reporting on something tragic, it's important to know for yourself why that situation has arisen. um, Cross check everything you can on the ground, claims that people are making. um, and it is possible to tell a story empathetically and to be factual at the same time, so they're not mutually exclusive. um, So Radhika says that it is heartening to see so many female reporters, especially on the ground at the print. Thank you, Radhika, for noticing. How do you plan for a field coverage stint? Your route, the people to meet, the means of traveling, etc. So, um, at the print, we thankfully have a really nice and strong network. Our logistics are worked out between us reporters, editors, our colleagues. Often, when you're going out to report on something, especially if you're going out to a place that you've never been to before, you always have to take the help of colleagues who've either been there before or know people over there. It's important for you also to get in touch with people you may have spoken to in the past. Another really important aspect um, of reporting outside and doing ground reports outside of your place of your normal place of work, which in my case is Delhi, is also getting in touch with journalists who are based in the area that you're going to cover, because they have a lot of knowledge. They have a lot of information that they can help you with. So it's sort of coordinating between all of these people, and being able to sort of make sure that you land safely wherever you have to go. So you would reach out to say a local journalist over here. You would take the help of colleagues to find a place, and of course you would plan your route around your sources and around your stories. So often when you go out to report, you're not going without any idea of what you're going to do. You have an idea of, okay, this is the story I have to do. Like for example, I'm here right now in Imphal. I know that a couple of stories that I have to cover are one about the Loktak Lake, another about these two activists, a journalist and an activist, Kishore Chandra Wankem and Erendro Lechombaum, who are currently in jail right now for, under NSA for saying something so quote unquote seditious, for saying that cow urine and cow dung don't help in the treatment of COVID-19. So I am here knowing that these are the stories I have to pursue, and I'm contacting people who would know more about these things and who could help me uh, with my information gathering. So Akash wants to know, given the nature of your work, how does a young journalist take care of their mental health? Uh, Another really important question. Um, I think the way we so journalism is it's a very high stress environment for sure. It's very competitive. You're always expected to be on. You're always expected to be in the know of what's happening. Um, and you're also always exposed to social media, because you have to, I mean, social media is often where news breaks. It's also where people share their work. So you're always on social media. You're always sort of um, clued in on what's happening. It's a very competitive industry, so when somebody else gets a story that you don't, it can be really difficult to cope with. Um, I think an important way to deal with your mental health is to also learn that it's okay to switch off from time to time. Obviously, keeping your employers in the loop. It's important to know that it's okay to take some time off, and it's it's important to, yeah, just sort of manage the time you spend on screen. It's important to involve other parts of your life, like small joys, cooking, meeting friends, all of that. Like, get enough of all of that, and I think that is how that's an important way to sort of manage your mental health. Of course, uh, there are a lot of journalists who also go to therapy, something I'm also considering doing, and something that should be talked about more often in journalism. And that's another way to sort of, make sure that you're taking care of yourself, um, when you're doing this very, very high stress sort of job. So please keep sending your questions. I will try to answer all of them. Um, okay. So Ashok wants to know, what recognitions does a journalist aspire for? What is the career path of a young journalist? So I I think when it comes to recognition and work, it's, for having subscribers like you who are in touch with what we're doing and are interested in what we're doing, having readers, having people who, let us know that what we're doing is worthwhile, is 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 the most I think we could ask for. It's really important as a journalist to know that what you're doing isn't futile, and that, yeah, that what you're doing is of value and import. And a big a big help is having readers, viewers, encourage us and let us know that, we're being heard and watched. So that's one. Two is obviously, when once you start getting involved in a story, and once you're looking into something, um, you really just want to get it right, and you want to get it out before anybody else, because that's how the news cycle works. It works by news breaks, by people breaking stories, by digging out new information. And when you do get that piece of information, it's really exciting, and you want to sort of get it out, before anybody else has a chance to. So I think working towards that is probably, the the that's sort of the goal. Just doing more of that, doing more digging, doing more um, investigative stuff, looking at things beyond, reading between the lines, um, all of those things. And I think in terms of recognition, it's just knowing that you're being heard, and that people see value in what you're doing. I think that's a really important part of it. Savio wants to know, did we feel a difference in how people from different states reacted or behaved to you reaching out to them in these difficult times? So, the first thing that I thought of when I read your question, Savio, is my experience reporting in the early days of the pandemic in 2020. In 2020, I traveled with my colleague Praveen Jain. We went to both Rajasthan and Gujarat to cover how the states were sort of managing the COVID crisis at that point in time. It was still very early days. It was mid-April when we were still traveling. There weren't that many cases in the country, still in the 10,000s or so. And both of us noticed, a very stark difference in the way both governments were reacting to us, and also sort of managing the crisis amongst themselves. in our experience, the Rajasthan government was a lot more open, a lot more willing to speak to us about how they were managing, keeping numbers low at that point in time. Whereas it was a lot harder to get comment from the Gujarat government, from officials in the Gujarat government, particularly in Ahmedabad at that time. Um, there was a lot of hesitancy to sort of speak to the media, to reveal how things were being managed. And so, the way you react to that is by, like I said earlier, when somebody is reluctant to speak to you, it's important to be persistent, to keep trying, to say, look, I'm here to do my job. I just like you're doing your job, and please do consider speaking to us. We need your comment for this, and just trying your luck with getting people to speak to you, essentially, when, especially in a high stress situation. Um, so that is how we do it. Um, Please keep sending your questions. We are here listening to what you want to know, and I'm here to answer anything that you might want to know about what it's like to report on the ground, what it's like to put a report together. Um, okay. Santosh wants to know if there is enthusiasm for vaccination among all age groups, sex, caste, and religion. And if most people above the age of 60 are vaccinated in places that I've visited in rural areas. So, I have only just started my stint at Manipur, so I haven't been to any rural areas as of yet. But several of my colleagues have. Fatima Khan was in Madhya Pradesh. Jyoti Yadav was traveling through Uttar Pradesh and Bihar to cover vaccine hesitancy and vaccine availability in all of these states. Um, there is certainly a lot of vaccine hesitancy among certain pockets in rural places. And as we've seen, I mean, the data sort of shows us that not there still is a large amount of the population that is yet to be vaccinated. So people above 60, I will have to check the all India figure, but a healthy amount of people above 60 have been vaccinated, particularly in urban areas, but the same may not, we can't say the same thing uniformly for rural areas at all. So, Arijit wants to know, how difficult is it working in different locations? What are the logistical issues at the time of COVID? And how are people sort of affected by COVID restrictions? So, some of the what makes moving around a little easier during COVID times, because of all of these restrictions, because of lockdowns, is being a journalist. When you have a press card, the police who are barricading are more likely to let you go. So that's been a huge advantage. Just having being part of the press is has really allowed, um, has really helped me in my experience, sort of get to a place when I need to, where most people would not normally be able to reach. That's one thing. Two is also the extraordinary sort of kindness of strangers or people you've just met. Oftentimes you will have to rely on strangers, people you don't know, to sort of help you out. And they're not obligated to, but more often than not they do help. um, it's also sort of, when you go in to report something on the ground, you're automatically accounting for the worst case scenario and sort of preparing mentally for that, and physically as well. So always carrying, a little food in case you don't have any, always carrying water, always keeping your phone charged, always having an extra set of batteries, things like that, just to sort of keep you prepared for the worst if you're not able to sort of get out of the situation yourself. Keeping your emergency contacts handy, all of those kinds of things. Please send in your questions. Anything that you'd like to know about what it's like to report. Um, Please also send in any tips that or story ideas that you may have. Anything that you would like to see us cover more of. Any story ideas that you may have yourself. Um, so yes, we're all ears for anything that you may have for us. Okay. So Aditya says that he would like us to do a story on e-waste. That's a good idea. And in fact, into in a couple of years ago, I had done a story on waste management in Delhi, where we have these huge piles of garbage, three of them in the city, and sort of why it's making recycling and waste to energy so difficult. It's one of the biggest problems with waste management in India is that we don't segregate our waste, including e-waste. And so when we build these sort of waste to energy plants, they're forced to not work properly and are in fact pollutants because they're not made to operate with mixed waste, which is what we produce. We don't segregate dry and wet waste, for example. Um, so that's also one of the reasons why we have these huge sort of garbage mounds in Delhi and a lot of major cities, in fact, and in the outskirts of many cities, you will find these landfills. Um, so e-waste is definitely going to be an issue, and thank you for suggesting it. I think we would be able to maybe do a story on that in the future. Um, Aditya also wants to know if I've ever been threatened by local politicians. Uh, no, not in my experience. Thankfully, I haven't been threatened by local politicians, but there are instances where people are really rude, untoward, um, and generally quite impolite. My colleague Jyoti Yadav wrote about one of her experiences when she went to interview a politician in Haryana who was extremely rude to her, even spat in front of her when she asked a question. So there are times when you have to deal with uh, people who are incredibly rude. Thankfully, I haven't faced any sort of threat from a local politician. That hasn't happened with me. So um, I don't think I could answer that question, but thank you for asking it. Um, any other tips, ideas, things that you'd like to share with us? Because we are listening, and we would like to. We're always welcoming new ideas and stories to cover. Part of the job is you know constantly asking your sources and people around you to give you things to write about, talk about, look into, all of that. So if there's something that you think that we can cover more, something that we're not looking at, something that you think would make for a good story, you should let us know. Okay, I think that this session is coming to an end. I think we've answered most of the questions that have come. Thank you so much for listening and for reading our work, for being there. I hope that I was able to answer some of your questions and sort of demystify the process of writing a report. I just like to reiterate that the great thing about journalism is that it's something that it's a public good, and it's also something that everybody can contribute to, can work towards, and can essentially do. So thanks so much, and yeah, do continue to subscribe, and ask your friends to subscribe, ask your families to subscribe, and keep reading us. Thanks so much.